Hi, Alan Stratton from As Wood Turns. Recently, Carl Jacobson and Mike Walt have had a bit of a challenge running with eccentric turnings. And in fact, Carl made an eccentric tea light. I decided to make one, but make it cross-grain and in walnut. Mine didn't turn out so well. So I decided to change it and make it a segmented tea light. One that would be safer to turn and would actually more likely yield. So let's make a segmented tea light, a safer alternative to eccentric.
After dimensioning the wood, the first task is to cut the segments for each ring. For this tea light, I need 1 closed segment ring in maple and 6 open segment rings in walnut. The base was salvaged from a failed eccentric turning. Open segment work is more forgiving than closed segment work. Just get the saw miter angle close and cut the segments. For the closed segment, the key is the saw setup. The angle guide is not precise enough for the segmented work. It will get you close, but close only counts in horseshoes, not in wood turning. I used a strip of scrap MDF to cut test segments. Test their fit, adjust the saw, and repeat until the segments in the ring fit together nicely. Gluing up open segments is much easier with a template. I put the segments in their respective grooves and put a rubber band around them to secure them. Then carefully spread glue. I'm using Woodturner Pro's Stomper to align the base and the segment ring. Then pile up some extra weight to hold it in place while the glue dries. Before the glue dried, I used a pipe cleaner to clean up excess glue from between the segments. Then mount the partial bowl to sound the top surface flat and level. Then repeat 5 more times. I glued up the closed segment ring for the top surface in half rings, cleaned up the joint and glued the 2 halves together. Then I put the closed segment in a modified Longworth chuck, applied glue, and glued the top ring to the tea light. Now for the fun part, the actual turning. I had completed some minor turning while the rings were being glued up. However, I could not do much because the glue was fresh and I did not want to risk breaking the open segments. With the gaps, they don't have much side support and fracture very easily until the top ring is in place. I started by parting off 1/2 of the top closed segment ring. I only needed a ring about 1/4 inch thick, but it's actually easier to glue up a thicker ring and either trim it down or part it off. I hope to maybe use the spare ring later on another project. Only later did I realize that I could make it to make a small saucer for the tea light. Then turn the exterior using a gouge in a combination of push cuts, bowl cuts, and shear scrapes. Whatever works. I'm not a purist. The differences from a cross grain bowl are, first, the all grain is now face grain, more like a spindle turning, but the grain is running around the ring. This is a plus. And second, there are a lot of gaps in the turning. I'm cutting a lot of air, and this requires a more gentle touch. This is a minus. I sanded the exterior up through 220 grit, then applied walnut oil, then final sanded with 320 grit. I dunked the whole tea light in a tub of walnut oil to get oil in all the gaps. Now for the interior. To start with, I used a gouge to do most of the wood removal, then switched to a round carbide cutter. With the tooling complete, I sanded the interior again through 220 grit, applied oil, then sanded with 320 grit. Now for the hard part, finishing the bottom. Since the tea light is so small, I wanted to just hold it in my scroll chuck. However, the top of the tea light is too big for my standard jaws and too small for my wider jaws. I don't know why I keep hitting this sour spot. Rather than making a jam chuck, I wrapped tape around the lip of the tea light, then removed 2 jaws from the scroll chuck, inserted the tea light, and then reattach the 2 jaws with a single bolt each. This should be enough to hold this tea light at a slow speed to to finish the bottom. Then tool the bottom and sand up through 220 grit. On a recent video, a viewer asked how I sign projects, so here we go. I use a Dremel vibrating engraving tool. I also put on a pair of magnifying glasses so that I can see the fine detail. At this year's Utah Woodturning Symposium, I picked up a paint stick from Cindy Drozda. I decided to try it out for the first time on this tea light. I rubbed it into the engraving, then rubbed off the excess with a paper towel. Then I applied oil and sanded it with 320 grit paper. The sanding and oil took away much of the gold lacquer, but there's enough left to highlight the engraving just a little on this very dark walnut. It's not what I expected, but it's okay. I'll have to experiment more with it. At this point, I realized that I could use the excess thin ring as a saucer. That future project is now. It's the perfect size except for the hole in the middle. So the first task is to turn a plug to fill the hole in the middle of the ring. I glued a scrap piece of walnut to a wooden faceplate with hot melt glue. Then I used a parting tool to cut out a plug that would be large enough to fill the hole. Then I mounted the thin ring to the faceplate again with hot melt glue while centering the ring with the tailstock. A rubber stopper was just the right size to center the thin ring. Then carefully cut a hole in the thin maple ring to hold the walnut plug. It took a lot of trial and error fitting to get it right. Then I glued it in. After letting the glue dry, it's time to tool the underside of the saucer. Here I mostly used a square carbide cutter. This maple is especially sweet in a ring. It streams off in thin ribbons without any tear out. I cut a small bead on the walnut plug. This bead I'll use to mount the saucer for the top side. I sanded and finished the underside completely, as I did the tea light. For the top side, I switched to a round carbide cutter. The walnut plug was a little punky and had some tear out. I applied thin CA glue to the entire walnut surface and let it dry without accelerator. Then I finished the top side. So this tea light now has a saucer. This tea light did not have any of the special risks and gotchas of an eccentric or off-center turning, but does have a pleasing way of letting light shine through its sides. Be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel. And we'll see you on the next video. This is Alan Stratton from EsWoodTurns.com.